Have you ever imagined the stories of Jesus after his death and the resurrection stories? Have you ever noticed how those stories are told in the Gospels? It is a number of stories packaged in different ways. In one Gospel, there's women crying, confused, wondering what happened. In another Gospel, there's men walking away from Jerusalem, disappointed and trying to figure out what had happened. In the Gospel that we read today, it is the story of the disciples walking back to fishing. I think the story of resurrection is a slow grammar. It is not something that happens like a big bang and then everything starts over. It is not something that happens and then your life is changed. But it is a slow movement, a growing awareness, and a way in which God brings us back to an awareness of this change that God has effected through the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. I think Easter faith takes us slowly in small doses. We walk with this faith by understanding him as he rises. We miss him, we walk through confusion, and slowly a touch, a word, a movement, a gesture, and something of this resurrection story begins to find its way into our hearts and into our minds and into all that we are. So today I want us to reflect on just those moments. What would it mean to really think of Jesus as a resurrection people? We've been through a series, and the series we've been saying Jesus is a pilgrim. And today we want to look at how this pilgrim Jesus really is a God who offers us second chances. The God that comes to us, that comes to Peter in his confusion, that comes when the disciples say, we are going fishing. They have found that moment in them that they've lost the hope, and they will go back to the moment that was before. And so the theme for today is God who gives us second chances. This pilgrim Jesus, the God that we've been reflecting on in this series, is the God that really is going to break through to us now. What does it mean for the pilgrim Jesus to break through into our story, even when our journeys break? I think there are three things I want to speak to today. I want to speak to the first one. When we don't know what to do, you listen to the story. After Jesus had appeared to his disciples by the sea, and it happened in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and other disciples were together. And listen to what Peter says. I am going out to fish. Peter told them, well, we will go with you. So they went out and got into their boat, and that night they caught nothing. See, friends, when our journey in life fractures, we return to the familiar. We return to the old patterns of our lives. We go to the places that once made sense in our lives. Peter says, I am going back fishing. And then recognize that something, as Peter says that, as he says, I am going back to what I knew before this failed moment. This moment that I thought was the change, the one moment that meant everything. It seems to have disoriented us. When we are disappointed, when we go through difficult moments and something doesn't seem to work and we are disoriented, in the disorientation, in the failure, we feel so unsettled that we choose to return to what was before. In what places in your life have you returned to what you knew? But do you recognize that when you return to the things that you knew, there is more than just you returning to the things you knew? There's people around you that sometimes when the choices we make in the moments of our failure, of our disappointment, or our fear, or the moments of our disorientation, they also affect those around us. For Peter, the whole 6 and 7 of them went back to fishing. They go back to what they knew before they started following Jesus. They go back to what they tried and they know well. Isn't this true with us? That when something goes wrong, we also choose to go back to those patterns, behaviors, the things that we knew. But the sadness of their going back is that they go back and they toil for a whole night and they catch nothing. Sometimes there's grace that sits in going back to the place you knew and you think that place can still hold you, and you feel when you arrive in that place that that place can't hold you anymore. But the power of the story of Jesus in John 21 is that as they get back to that place, Jesus comes to them, and in the emptiness, he doesn't say, do you see you didn't catch anything? He doesn't scold them, but he says to them, while you say to me, we have caught nothing, in the place of your emptiness, there is still grace that can hold you, even when you go back to a place that has now become empty for you. Can you imagine what that might mean for you? Where have you gone, and where is God saying, that place is empty, but I am here. I can restore you. The places you've returned to when you were fearful and have failed or disappointed or betrayed, what has happened? God will meet you there. The power of the story is that God finds us at the very place, sometimes to the place we return to. That's where God finds us. The second thing that happens in that story is that not only does Jesus arrive and catches up with them, not only does God follow them to the places where they walk away to, not only is God so powerful in God's grace that he never lets us go on our devices, he follows us even back to those moments where we return to. But God also comes to us, and there's a moment of recognition. Listen to the scripture. Early in the morning, Jesus stood by the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, have you any fish? No, they answered. And then he said, throw your net on the other side and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to hold the net in because of the large number of fish. See, imagine Jesus standing on the shore and they don't even recognize him. Sometimes in our failure, in the moments and the situations that we have gone back to, it is even difficult to recognize. Recognize in this text that the recognition happens in a particular moment. It is at dawn when something doesn't look even bright enough. It is the waking up of a new day. But maybe that recognition is also a waking up of their minds, of their hearts, and the cloud that had shrouded them of the failure and the pain that they had gone through. All now comes with a deep, deep kind of recognition that now this is the one. John doesn't recognize, but Peter does. And then as they recognize, they realize that this is Jesus. And he calls them friends. Imagine that love and that grace. When you have walked away, when you don't even recognize the love that has called you, when you have lost your place in the mission and in the story of God, that God comes and says, do you have food? He addresses your hunger. He awakens your understanding, invites you back into a moment. He does not wait that your mind becomes clear about who God is, or you rediscover your feet, the steps of your feet. He does not wait for clarity or a full recovery of your body or your mind or healing. Before the confusion dissipates, God is already standing on the shore of your life. active when you think he is most absent? When have been those moments for you when you've recognized? Sometimes the recognition hasn't come through you, has come through your friends, the community, through a whisper, through a word, through a meal, through food, through sharing, through something that has been gifted to you by the fellowship of others, when the recognition has quietened in you, when God's awareness and love, through a prayer from a friend. Maybe these moments are the moments that bring us back to life, that help us recognize the grace that has always been there. It is that moment that Jesus not only walks to the moments that we have returned to, it is the slow awakening of recognition within us that comes with dawn and newness. Then there is that moment of restoration. Think of it. You walk back to the place that you've always known, and God comes and stands by your side. Think of it. You can't even recognize the love that once called you by name, and God offers you fish and bread again and says, come, let's talk to it. Think of it. When you've regressed to moments in your life that have not been the healthiest of moments of your life with God and your relationship with God, and Jesus comes to the shore of your life and restores you. Listen to this last few verses here. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than this? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. And Jesus says, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And then Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time Jesus said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus had asked him the third time. Do you love me? He said. You know all things, Lord. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. Imagine this. Before the death of Jesus, Peter betrayed Jesus. And he was sitting by the fire, a charcoal moment, where there were 3 denials of Jesus in that moment. He denies Jesus by another fire. In his restoration, Jesus comes back at breakfast and he makes another charcoal fire that warms Peter again and gives him food, new fish, new life. And then Jesus then asks him once more, do you remember that I love you? And the denials that were there in that first echo in his betrayal are now covered by invitation of love again. Peter, do you love me? Jesus doesn't say, Peter, do you remember how many times you denied me? Jesus doesn't say, Peter, do you remember how far you went deep into the darkness of that night? Peter, do you remember how broken things are within you? He doesn't say that. Neither does God say that with us. God always says, I see where you've been. And invites us to a slow recognition. And then in that moment, as we reflect, as we share the bread, as we share the fish, the new meal of God's love and grace, right there, Jesus begins a new journey with us. He gives us new life. He gives us what we know. He doesn't bypass the past. He doesn't bypass Peter's denials. He enters into that deep story, into the heart of our pain. That's where second chances are. Second chances are not about really throwing away where we have been, but second chances are a reorientation of the past. It is a reconfiguration of the life that we already know. It is a going back to that story, but not only going back to that story alone. It is going back with a God that comes and stands beside us in the places we return to. It is going back right there into that past up until God shapes and renews, as Romans would say. God sometimes renews us through our minds. The renewal of our hearts happens when the story of God, when God, the risen one, walks and stands with us in those moments where we denied, where we failed, where confusion roomed, and where fear broke us, and where disappointment, or when our hearts broke. In that moment, God forms again a new love, a new way of being. When we return, God comes and stands beside us. When we don't recognize God, he creates a meal and invites us into friendship again and shares bread with us up until the slow recognition of love comes. As I said in the beginning, we are walking into the grammar, slow grammar of resurrection in every touch, in every move, in every moment of our lives. God comes beside us. God awakens us to the love of God in gestures and love. May the one who journeys, the pilgrim Jesus, invite us to recognize that when we journey with Jesus, even failure is not the end. The journey with Jesus doesn't end with our failures. It is a moment when we start to return to what we know, that God brings us back again to life. Maybe the way away to fishing is the way back to the love of God, where God brings back our lives again. The struggle to recognize him becomes the place where God's grace opens the canvas deeper. When we carry the weight of what has gone wrong, Jesus, the pilgrim, comes again and again. He meets us where we are. He restores us where we are broken. He sends us forward with a reformed life. This is the shape of second chances. Not new lives, but God taking our very lives and making them fresh and new through the power of God's grace and God's Spirit in our lives. Let me pray a blessing over you. May the God of the resurrection, the one who breaks the chain of death and leads us back to life, the one who formed creation and recreates us through his resurrected love, may that God bless your heart. May that Jesus, who breaks the mold of death, pierces the tomb, shines in glory, walks beside us, comes to the places we run to, and slowly reveals God's self to us in the power of newness and fellowship and grace. May that God restore the things that have been broken and give you new life. May the Spirit of the one that rises from grace, from death, and the one that flourishes the world and feeds the world, the one that calls us back to love, the one that restores us to the graces, touch your heart deep enough to feel your knees stronger, your heart stronger, and your limbs walking again with a sense of responsibility that we are God's chosen to feed the lambs of the world. Go and be God's love, and be God's resurrected power, and be God's resurrection life in the world. Amen.